Cup.
I can for the first time in my life, I'm not even 100% sure who's in the playoffs. I hate to say that.
Philadelphia Flyers.
I've been watching nonstop.
Holy crap! There's gonna be a lot of people watching this bad boy.
Can you tell how many people are on?
Because I looked at some of the questions and it's like the same answer for all of them.
Hey, what's up, Kim? Yes, we are live. Yeah, this is just the way we communicate.
Can if I go into Facebook right now, I'll be able to see what's going on here.
Yeah.
Oh, you're gonna get some wicked feedback.
Yeah, I'll silence that shit.
Sumon, we're live.
Oh yeah.
Oh man, this is great. I'm gonna give some love out to Amita Crescent Crew. Carol, what's happening? We just moved. This is gonna be part of this discussion. My new neighbors have no idea what's gonna hit them. Oh my God, our kids are maniacs.
Awesome.
You know what I'm saying? Okay, so we'll give time for people to file in. The other question, okay, so before we start for real, this has been on my mind for a while. When it comes to chicken wings, okay, do you prefer the drumstick or the flats? If you had to go with one.
Drumstick.
Okay, you're all crazy. You have to mix them up. You can't. It's yin and yang.
No, you gotta go with one or the other, man. It's like
it's an unfair. First of all, it's not anatomically correct.
Are you gonna die on this hill?
You got to have the wing, right? It's a okay. So first of all, there's anatomy, and secondly, it's a balance. It's a balance.
No, but you have to go with one. You have one.
Are you going to go into the boneless chicken wings now too?
No, that's not a wing.
Loves those. Sumon loves those. The salt and pepper flavored boneless. Those are
those aren't wings. I'm sorry.
That's really spicy. Okay,
that's a chicken nugget.
Chicken nugget. Do you remember that? You see that guy in Nebraska? Is it Nebraska? He's taking the boneless wings people to court. That's the greatest.
It's really funny. I saw that the other day. The guy's a maniac.
Only in Middle America.
You know what though? He was deadpan the entire time. That guy stayed in character the whole time. He was fantastic.
Oh man, there's a good question. Actually, this is not good. This is a good point.
First question, I'll start.
Breaded or breaded? You can't go breaded. I'm sorry. You gotta go fresh. No, I'm sorry.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
Okay. What you
drinking? Who's got a bevy? What do we got? This is Scotch tasting, wine tasting, and COVID. Who's got some Irish whiskey? Kwadwo, I didn't see what you had there.
Oh, I'm a vino. I'm hitting up the red wine.
La di da.
Wine. Yeah, I'm very sophisticated.
I've got the Ardbeg.
The good stuff wasn't good.
That peat bog on fire and drink
you wanted to smoke a cigar, but this is the second thing you can do. The second best thing you can do.
Okay, those that are coming in, we're gonna start in about 3 minutes. We're just giving time for people to file in, but we're
talking about hockey.
Yeah, we're calling this the debates. Actually, here's one for you. As infectious disease doctors, legit NFL football. Okay, we're having our draft in 2 days. What's the chances that that season is not completed?
I think it's going to resemble baseball, where there's going to be outbreaks periodically just because of how it's structured, unfortunately. I think in this current climate, obviously things change with time, but in this current climate, if you want to conduct sports with minimal impact, the bubble seems to be the best approach. Soccer, basketball, hockey, so far so good. I think that's the way to do it.
Let me add something. I got to tell you something that for the first couple of weeks of baseball, I was like, okay, this is for sure going to crash and burn, right? And then, they've had a case recently, but they actually have not been too bad. And I can't explain why. I don't know. I was saying that there was a 0% chance the baseball season would finish. I'm still thinking it's probably 5%, but it's not.
But it's been impacted. That's the thing, 100%. Right? People have had to go home. Teams have had to delay. Teams have had to quarantine. I think maybe it'll finish. So they might, crawl across that finish line. But I think that it's been impacted significantly more than like the bubble approach.
Yeah, fair enough.
I
Fair
don't know. They canceled CFL.
Become tennis fans. Tennis is naturally socially distanced. Okay, you can do all Grand Slams. It wouldn't matter. Just have no fans.
But is there anything wrong with tennis right now?
Well, they're doing the U.S. Open, and it's weird. You'll watch the point, and you don't realize how much the crowd matters when there's just no cheering after the point. And the other thing that bothers me is I'm a Nadal fan, and Djokovic is going to like for sure tie him because he's going to win U.S. Open and he'll win Australian. So, yeah.
I don't know anything about tennis. I just remember the time Sumon was trying to watch. We were in Peru together, and Sumon was trying to watch tennis streaming at like 4 o'clock in the morning because of the time zone change or something.
Yeah.
And the stream kept cutting out because I was online watching other crap. I was watching like hockey fights from the 1980s or something like that.
It was the 5th set, 2012, Australian Open, Nadal versus Djokovic. Nadal was up a break, and all of a sudden it stopped working. And I'm like, what's going on here? I walk out. He's like watching Bob Probert kick the crap out of somebody.
Yes. Oh my God. I will say this one, that recent was it Federer that went in the 5th set at Wimbledon, and it was like.
Oh, with Djokovic.
Djokovic, yeah.
Oh,
that I actually, that was legit. That was like proper.
It was awesome, though. Yeah, awesome.
Awesome. Okay, boys, I think we can get
on the
started.
don't careometer, that's like a 10 out of 10.
Look at how uncultured they are. I actually wore a nice shirt today, and these guys are wearing like short sleeve shirts. Like, come on, guys.
Oh man,
you didn't get the dress code?
It's merch. Oh,
don't remember last time. You should talk about what happened last time.
About what happened? Sorry, I missed it.
So Sumon texted me right before the last time we were all on together. He's like, hey Isaac, what are you wearing? What are you wearing? I'm like, nothing, just a jeans and a t-shirt. It's no big deal. So Sumon shows up in jeans and a t-shirt, and I put on like a sport coat and a tie. And like, we get on. I'm like, Sumon, what are you wearing? This is like the podcast, man. Step up.
Oh, classic.
Pays these shirts for me right now.
Classic. All right, boys. I think we could get started. Okay, we are recording. Yes, we're good. Everything is good. Quadcast Nation, I want to thank you for joining us. We are in our 3rd rendition of Dr. Sumon Chakrabarti and Dr. Isaac Bogoch. We are trying to answer all questions relevant to getting kids back to school, as many as we can. We're almost going to be a bit rapid fire, boys. I think this is going to be a lot of fun. Going to get all the housekeeping things out of the way. All right. So for those that are Quadcast fans, we're in new settings. We moved from Amita, Carol and crew, thank you for putting on that party, down to Courtenay Avenues, new gigs. Check it out. We even got the stand-up desk. Look at this. Whoa.
Ergonomic. Whoa. Very ergonomic.
Yes. Tell me that ain't fresh. All right. Thank you for that. So Julia is going to be helping out the show again today. Thank you so much. She has the amazing website, A Spoonful of Science, where you get all your nutritional advice. Thank you, Julia, for helping us out. We couldn't do this without you. You just saw me representing my merch. Proceeds to merchandise for Solving Healthcare is going to Give a Mile. What a great organization, connecting dying patients with their families. It's Kevin Crowe is an incredible human being. He was on the show a few episodes back. So we're really, it's a true privilege to support the show. Low Carb Summit. I'm going to keep preaching this, guys. One of the messages that we're not hearing about too much with this whole COVID epidemic is the fact that metabolically poor patients do worse. You know, diabetics, hypertensive patients are what we're seeing. And so I don't care what you do, but it's time to get healthy. And so we had that summit on the low carb approach, keto approaches to health, which was fascinating. We had Sumon, Jesus Christ. Dr. Paul Mason, we had Joy Kitty, we had Ivor Cummins, and it was a great conversation. And so we'll see the links to the show there. If you want to see the summit. For those on Facebook, if you press ID in the text box, I think we'll be able to get you. We'll email you the show after it's recorded, and you'll also get linked up with our newsletter, which is incredible. See what's coming up in solving healthcare and so forth. So absolutely type that into the text box. Okay, so like I said, we're doing this show. Actually, I never even got into it. We're doing this show because a lot of anxiety regarding going back to school and tons of questions, and they're good questions. How do we keep our kids safe? How do we keep our teachers safe? And so we had to get the boys back. We had to do it. And before getting into some of these questions, I want to give a message out to the teachers, because to be honest, if I'm being absolutely truthful, this was a big driver of doing the show today. I want to say that it's totally, we understand that you're scared. All of us on this panel have been frontline. We've seen what COVID could do, and it was extremely intimidating in the beginning of the pandemic. And we understand where your fears are, but this is, and we were, we got all the accolades and we're being called heroes and so forth. But honestly, this is your time. This is your time to be the heroes now, because with your help, knowing that our kids are safe, knowing that our kids are in good hands, knowing that we can have peace of mind when we're doing our frontline work, saying that, hey, our kids are being taken care of, knowing that we could have as much staff available, not at home taking care of their kids. This is so important in the pandemic. So this is your time. This is your time to be that frontline hero, because we can't do this without you. So this is a true driver of why we wanted to do this. And I hope this podcast or this live cast helps in that endeavor. Okay. And the other thing too is actually, no, that's okay. All right. So we'll start off with probably the most basic question here. So we hear that kids get less sick from COVID. Is this founded on any science? Are we seeing any evidence of this whatsoever? Dr. Sumon Chakrabarti, do you want to take this one first?
I will. And I will make an opening statement, first of all, is that I totally agree with something you said, is that, we get you as the teachers, students, parents. We felt the same way in March. And I completely understand the trepidation. We're here to support, and hopefully, there's no risk-free solutions, but I think that we're going to be successful ultimately. So yeah, so let's start with kids. Kids, I think that this has been a bit of a hot topic, unfortunately, and we wanted to kind of go by the science on this. The long and short of it is that kids, yes, they can get COVID. Yes, they can spread it. But in the grand scheme of things, they don't tend to get severely sick, and they don't tend to be the driver of spread. Can it happen in a situation? For sure. But, you rarely see a situation where one kid is responsible for, hundreds of infections. And I think part of the reason for that, we talk about these super spreaders, right? And super spreaders is not just the fact that you have like a mutant ability to secrete virus, but it's also the way that adults act. Think about if you're an adult and you work in an office, you're going to be talking and yelling and screaming and talking and walking around to seeing hundreds of people potentially during the day. Kids don't do that. Yeah, kids slobber on everything, but they don't have that many connections in their network. And that's part of the reason why I think that overall the risk is lower. That doesn't mean that we don't be careful. That doesn't mean that we don't worry about them. But overall, the main thing is kids tend to not spread as efficiently, and they tend to not get as sick.
Anything to add, Isaac?
No, I totally agree with Sumon. And if we look, you can go on the Government of Canada website, and anyone can just Google, COVID-19 stats and demographic or epidemiology. You'll see there's really good data parsed out on the website. And you can look at the US actually, and Europe, the EU has good data as well. You can look at, metrics, outcomes per age group. So you can look at, for example, hospitalizations. Some of them will tease out intensive care unit admissions. And of course, sadly, but one of the ultimate metrics is death. And you just see that people under the age of 20 compared to the other age groups are rarely hospitalized compared to the other age groups. It can happen. And of course, death is an extremely rare event in those under the age of 20. Of course, it can happen, but it's a very rare event. I think in Canada, there's been one case in a 19-year-old, and I believe that person had other medical comorbidities. Still tragic, still awful. But as Sumon points out, kids can get this infection, kids can transmit this infection. But in general, kids just don't get as sick as adults. And also it's not necessarily the point, right? Kids are going to school, and obviously we don't want our kids to get this infection. I'm quite frankly less worried about the skids. The skids, they are kind of skids. I'm less worried about the kids. I'm more worried about the adults who that they interact with, right? Who do they go home to? What about their parents? What about their grandparents? What about anyone with medical comorbidities in the house? What about the teachers in the classroom or the other ancillary staff in the school? That's what I'm really concerned about. The kids, most likely, we don't want them to get infected, but they'll mostly be fine by and large. There's going to be kids with special needs, which we'll probably get into in a little bit. Yeah. But as an amplifier of infection and as potential modes of transmission in the community settings, that I'm concerned about that.
Yeah, I heard on a podcast too, just getting to the teachers. I haven't read this anywhere, so don't quote it as Bible, but I read that, or I heard that teachers basically weren't having higher risk of infections than the general public. I don't know if you guys came across that anywhere, but yeah, I found that interesting because I mean the real, as you mentioned, my real concern would be the teachers and the people at home that get exposed. So, and another question that has come up repeatedly for this is that what are the potential long-term impacts of having a COVID infection? Like you've seen I think it was in the Toronto Star. I kind of had issues with this actually. They posted this family that wasn't even swabbed, so they weren't even sure the patient they had COVID, and they were saying they had these ongoing symptoms such as prolonged cough and stuff. Is there any data to back this up, or in terms of long-term implications of COVID?
Isaac, you want to go ahead?
Okay. Sure.
Oh, sorry, I put it out there.
Are we doing paper, rock, scissors, or what's going on?
Paper, rock, scissors. Okay, let me. I'll start quickly.
And go ahead.
I think this is a very new area. Obviously, we're 9 months into the pandemic. There is certainly some signal. We're seeing people that have some kind of like ongoing symptoms. Now, I've seen people that have the kind of typical ongoing symptoms following a viral infection involving the lungs. So, post-infectious cough, post-infectious fatigue. But, I've been seeing more and more people that are complaining about a lot of other things. And these are kind of persistent symptoms like, debilitating fatigue, paresthesias, chest pain. I don't know what it is yet. It's difficult to completely kind of put a kind of diagnosis on what's happening. I don't think it's persistent infection, but I think it's some type of after effect. But again, I think we might find out more, and there's ongoing research on that right now, especially at our colleagues at Sunnybrook are looking at a lot of these post-COVID situations. Yeah,
it's interesting. I mean, I'm not surprised. I think some people are using the term long haulers, and certainly there is growing evidence that a small but real, of course, a small but real percentage of people have persistent symptoms after I would just say the acute manifestations are over. And I think it's going to be very important to do a couple of things. One is obviously if people have symptoms, if people feel unwell, they need attention, they need care, they need to be listened to. And that's important. But I think if we really look at that core group of people with persistent symptoms, I think what we're going to find is, and again, I'm just saying this out of love and respect here, that some of them will have never had COVID-19, right? Sort of what you alluded to, Kwadwo, earlier. Some of them will have never had COVID-19. Some of them will have had COVID-19. And I think it's going to be extremely important to tease those two groups apart, which might actually be challenging, even with the current diagnostic tests available. Now, even those without COVID-19, again, there's no finger pointing, there's no shaming, there's no blaming. People have symptoms, people feel unwell, they need care, they need help, they need support, they need to have this investigated. But if we really look at, so I'm not brushing that under the table whatsoever, but if we look at persistent symptoms in people who are positive had COVID-19, obviously that's a real event. We see seeing cases of this periodically. I think it's going to be, at the end of the day, a small proportion of people who have this, but it's the real deal. And a lot of it is, as Sumon pointed out, fatigue. A lot of it's fatigue. We are seeing some people with if we look at, for example, people who recover from an ICU admission, it doesn't, here, Kwadwo, I don't need to tell you this. Like, we look at Margaret Herridge, Dr. Margaret Herridge at Toronto General, like one of the pioneers of this area. If you make it to the ICU for any reason and you survive the ICU for any reason, many people have functional disability 5 years out. She pioneered this. It's in the New England Journal. She's amazing. She's a solid scientist and clinician. I worked with her. She's incredible. But that's really the sickest of the sick. COVID-19 or not, people who recover from the ICU can tend to have functional disabilities years after they are discharged. Now, people with mild COVID-19 infections that never make it into hospital, even them, some of them are still having persistent symptoms months and months after. Kids are not immune to this. And I think there's going to be some kids that are going to have that as well.
Yeah. I think this is a quick question. Are we seeing the low rates in kids because we did the lockdown, social distancing, and they haven't been in school? Or you think we'll continue to see that in places that either have opened up or they've had schools never closed? I'm not picking.
Can I take that?
Okay.
I think the low rates in kids is multifactorial. One is that schools were locked down and they didn't have an opportunity to get infected. Two is also probably a selection bias. In general, kids have milder symptoms, so they're just not getting tested. And I think if they were testing more, they'd probably find more cases. So I think and there's probably a multitude of reasons why the incidence in kids was lower. Now, if we look at the data now in Canada, like people under the age of 40, and I hate how they break it up into 20-year age groups. You can actually, there's more granular data, but younger individuals, not just 20-year-olds, but younger individuals, depending on which part of the country you're in, like children and teens and like school-age kids, sometimes they represent either the highest or the second highest group with the greatest incidence of cases. So of course they certainly anyone can get infected. So there was probably a few reasons why we weren't seeing a lot of cases in kids earlier on.
All right. This one's a big one, and I think I just think it's a good. I think it's a good way to cover a lot here, actually. So, what kids, when you off the top of your mind, Grapes, what kids would be at high risk of going back to school? Like, who would you really got to think about? Hey, man, like maybe you should stay home, or just the risk outweigh the benefits.
Yeah, and listen, this is a huge question that everybody who has kids in school is grappling with right now. I think that, initially I thought that it was just, for example, if you have asthma or if you have, a lot of these things don't seem to matter. It seems like the kids that get the sickest from this and require, either a major hospitalization or, ventilation are kids that have severe, neurodegenerative disorders, all sorts of like kind of end stage respiratory, tracheostomy, that kind of thing. That said, is that the other thing I think you have to consider is what your house status is like, right? I will say one thing, that right now we are at a good place in Canada, that overall we have a very low amount of transmission all across the country. So that protects everybody in every circumstance, because the chance of there being COVID to begin with is low. But that said, if you, for example, were living with somebody who has, a patient 60 years old or over, family member, grandma, 60 years old or over, has comorbidities, and is someone really close with the kids, maybe that's a personal choice. You'd say, maybe I'll keep my kids home. So it's kind of more of the contact that you're worried about as opposed to the kid, him or herself. But, it's a complicated situation. And I think that, right now we all have to kind of take the risk factors, look at your own risk tolerance and make a decision for yourself. And it's not going to be the same for everybody, but I will go on record saying one thing. My kids are small. They're, 1 and 2 right now. But if they were of school age, I would send them based on what's happening right now, September the, whatever it is, 3rd, 2020. Sorry. I was.
No, I've been muting because the kids are still up in this bad boy. Anything to add, Isaac? Like, the reason I think I left it pretty open-ended too is like we had a lot of questions from special needs communities, and so I thought that might be a way to.
That's a really good point, right? That's a very good point, because special needs children is such a broad umbrella, and you can imagine underneath that umbrella there will certainly be children who, if they get infected, are at risk of having a more severe outcome. Absolutely. But because it's such a broad umbrella, there's probably some children under that umbrella that are probably at no greater risk of having a severe outcome compared to other children. So just by using the term special needs, I think is not sufficient enough. And as Sumon points out, it's so hard to make blanket statements here, because so much of this has to be individualized and also contextualized, right? What is the risk for your individual child? What home does your child go home to? Is there someone else? So special needs or not, who do you go home to at the end of the day? Is there someone at home who's at greater risk for having a severe infection if a child picks this up at school and brings it home? What are the rates of infection in the community? And what is the risk of introducing this into the school? I think the other interesting thing is when we're doing risk assessments, this is dynamic. This changes with time. So as parents are thinking about sending their kids back to school September 3rd, school's right around the corner. Look, you might be in an area where there's very, very little transmission. You think, you know what, we're good. We might have a grandparent at home, but there's so little transmission in our community, we're all in. And then you fast forward a couple of months and there's a big outbreak either at your school or in your community. You might say, you know what, we got to pivot here. This might not be the most appropriate thing given that we have grandparents living in the house. And so I think people really need to watch the situation on the ground evolve with time and periodically check in to see how things are going. And as Sumon points out, I don't want to just reiterate everything he said, but like a lot of this boils down to people's risk tolerances and risk thresholds. Sadly, it's true, but sadly, some people their arms are turned for them. Like this decision is made for them. Some people obviously don't have a choice, right? Some people, we've got, imagine single parents who are working, who are trying to support a family, whatever. There's a lot of different circumstances where people don't have a choice. Their kids are going back to school because of a variety of reasons. And that's obviously an extremely challenging situation. I'm not saying it's fair, because it certainly isn't, but that's the situation that a lot of people are left in, unfortunately.
Fair enough. Okay, class sizes. This is a big one that people, again, mad anxious about. 15 versus 25 versus 30. What's your point of view on that?
Can I start?
I'm going to start with Isaac.
I got a lot of opinions on this. And you know what sucks?
Make it rain. Make it rain, son.
Honestly, I don't know who's watching, but like for a while, it was a few weeks back, there was a lot of people putting words in my mouth, which was rather obnoxious. Listen, obviously, the smaller the class size, the better. I mean, that's just obvious. The kids have to physically distance, right? There's a lot of reasons to have a smaller class size. One, it certainly will facilitate physical distancing within the classroom. So that's extremely important. There's so many other reasons too. It might be easier to control a class. And even if there is space to physically distance, it might be easier to control a class if you've got younger kids, to ensure that the student to teacher ratio is in favor for the teacher, keeping everyone sort of up to date on what needs to happen. And the third thing is, if there is an outbreak or if there are cases in a classroom, the ripple effect, the impact on the other students is lower. I mean, if there's just fewer kids in the class, then fewer people can get it. And not only that, think about the repercussions if you have to send 15 kids home to isolate versus if you have to send 22 kids home to isolate. That might mean that those are additional parents that have to stay home and watch their kids if they're not old enough, which means that there's that many more parents who aren't working, who aren't supporting their families, who are there's a tremendous ripple effect. And then you expand that across the city, the province, the country. Like this has tremendous repercussions. So clearly small class sizes are better. Having said that, we do live in a world of limited resources. And I appreciate that there's yin and there's yang. And of course, this is not going to be perfect. And when you look at the various provincial plans, there's serious holes in all provincial plans. Some have bigger holes in their plans than others. But physical distancing seems to be an issue in many of the provincial plans. Can you maybe get class sizes a little bit smaller? Maybe you're not getting this, people are pulling this 15 out of their hat. That's a magic number. I mean, like, you can arbitrarily make it many other different numbers. But the point is, the smaller class size is better, but you really want to facilitate physical distancing within the class. Not all classes are created equally, right? You might have some really old buildings that are over 100 years old that have small classes, and like, you really can't physically distance in that class. Whereas you might have other facilities that are newer schools or larger classes, or the school has a gym that they're going to use. Like, you might have creative use of your facility where you can really spread kids apart and create and just use your environment a little bit better to really get kids 2 meters apart. But I know I'm rambling on. I think the key thing is physical distancing is extremely important, as are the other fundamental public health principles like ventilation, putting on a mask in an indoor setting, hand hygiene. But physical distancing is extremely important. I would aim for that 2 meter rule. One of the best ways to do it is to get class sizes smaller, and smaller class sizes have a lot of other positives beyond physical distancing, like we just talked about. So that's how I feel about that.
Pretty articulate there, Dr. Bogoch.
Well, thank you very much, Sumon.
I can move on, Sumon, if you're happy with that.
Yeah, that's an amazing answer.
Amazing answer.
Stop it.
Stop it.
You.
Yeah, but this is just me venting. Like, this is an opportunity for people to be creative, okay? Like, I know it's a resource thing. I know there's a lot of nuance to this, but you have gyms, you have like recreational centers that aren't being open, that aren't being used at the time. We have the capacity to be outside at times, like when we know there's reduced transmission. Be creative, be innovative, just like think outside the box. Like, it doesn't have to be like, I was talking with a colleague the kids went to school in Alberta today. 30 kids in a class in 2020.
Yeah, that's insane.
In general, in 2020, like, nah,
yeah,
man.
But that's insane. And you're spot on. You are spot. I totally agree with you. Now, depending on the province you're in, I know we're all sitting at, no, you're in Ottawa. We're in Toronto. I don't want to be Ontario centric here, but depending on the province you're in, the school boards or education has been given different money, different budgets to facilitate this. I'm not saying it's enough. I'm saying that they've been given budgets to do this. And at least in the Ontario setting, the message was, here's money. Schools aren't all created equally. Some schools might have enough space. If you need to hire teachers, hire teachers. Here's money. You might not have enough space. You need to rent out a rec center nearby to get your kids in there to spread them apart. Great. Like, there's no one size fits all solution. Here's money to do what you need to do to spread the kids out. The counterpoint to that is, great, thank you, we can do that. It's just not enough money. It's just not enough resources to do it. But I'm with you. It's time, like, I'm not, it's time to get creative. That's what they got. Of course we should advocate for more. Of course we can do better. Of course more is better, and there's always room for improvement on this. But at the end of the day, the school year is going to start, in a few minutes, and use the space that you've got wisely, use the resources that you've got wisely to make this as safe as possible. Reach out, and this is local, right? Like, we talk about provincial plans, but the rubber hits the road at the level of the school. And even though you might have schools under the same umbrella, in the same school board, in the same district, in the same province, they might have different solutions with the resources that have been applied to them. So you might have, schools that are close together, each other in proximity, that have totally vastly different safety profiles because of how they've adopted to how they've adopted these plans locally. So I think it's extremely important for parents to reach out to their local school to see how are you going to use the resources available to you to really implement these fundamental public health principles, especially physical distancing. That's really important, because then you can make an informed decision on really whether or not you're comfortable with your kid going back.
Great point. And this is one of the questions in terms of how is 1 meter versus 2 meters, is that better? I mean, to me, the further distance, the more impact. I don't know if we need to go into more detail than that. The question related to this a bit too, or maybe it's not even related. Okay, direct versus indirect exposure. So example that one of the people gave was your kid is in a class and someone is positive in the class. What do we have to do with their brothers and sisters? What do the parents have to do? Like, what from either the theoretical evidence from approach, like however you want to tackle that one. How do we deal with the indirect exposure? So that the kid, for example, that's is having no symptoms.
The exposures.
The exposures of
the meta exposure.
The exposures are the exposures are the exposures, and no one's symptomatic.
Right. Jack?
All right, I got this one. So this is actually something that we've been doing since the beginning. So I think that when you look at the way people are exposed, you have to kind of almost quantify the risk. Let's take a look at, the big main factors of the increasing risk of spread include closer distance, longer period of time in an enclosed space. Okay, so this is the part of the reason why when we look at the pattern of who has been getting infected, we look at cluster after cluster after cluster, they all tend to be in a situation where there are people in an enclosed space close together for a prolonged period of time with some sort of, whether it's yelling, talking, screaming, singing, that type of thing, an agitated level of breathing. Okay, so for example, if you are in a class and I'm sitting on one side of the class and somebody else has COVID and there's not a lot of mixing, the risk of me getting COVID from that person across the classroom at the other end is probably quite low. That said, from a public health standpoint, that entire cohort, the students that are allowed to mix together, the biggest cohort we'll see is one class, is the whole class will be sent home. But that said, if you are somebody who doesn't have COVID and you're asymptomatic, the secondary ones, we just basically tell them to watch for your symptoms. Okay, so for example, let's say if I'm in the same class as Isaac, he gets COVID and I get sent home and I don't have a lot of close contact with him. Then
why am I the guy getting COVID?
You should be.
You should be, man. You should be.
Look at you.
Isaac gets
Flames fan.
As an example.
God damn.
So if he gets COVID and I'm far away, then okay, I'll be sent home, but it's not going to really apply to my brother or my sister at home because it's now a second and third degree type of exposure. Those people will just be monitoring for symptoms. We have to remember, and I know this seems this was a virus that was a pandemic around the world. I don't mean to be flippant, but you have to work to get COVID. You don't just walk by somebody in a restaurant or a grocery store. You have to be exposed to them for several minutes, if not half an hour to a couple of hours before you get COVID. All right. So just having somebody in the same room is not enough.
Thank you for this.
Yeah.
No, man. And you see these cats when you're jogging by you and they start to freak out and sustained close proximity, indoor exposure. But that was a question I had personally because as a frontline staff, the kid gets exposed and I can't go to work that could have such a huge
reverberations.
Effect, you know what I mean? It would be endless. So thank you for that. Here's a question. Has there been any studies that you're aware of the rates of infections or transmissions from kids to adults?
Yeah.
I got this one, Bogoch.
Sure. It's funny because there's documented cases. There certainly are documented cases. But if we're talking about studies, it's kind of hard to unfortunately, most of the arrows are pointing in the other direction, from adults to kids, or the waters are muddied because a lot of it is in-house transmission. And a lot of the studies were looking at, not so much transmission within the schools, but transmission within the home. So it's not entirely clear who got it and who infected who in what order. Now, there are school-based outbreaks and some data from schools where you can see that the infections were amplified in the school settings, and children clearly went home with this infection and brought it into the community. So, there's certainly that data is available. I think I'm not going to put words into this person's mouth, but one of the issues that's being debated now is to what extent, or what is the efficiency of transmission of kids to others. So as Sumon pointed out a few minutes ago, anyone of any age can get infected. Doesn't matter if you're 1 minute old or 100 years old, anyone can get infected. Anyone can transmit infection. Again, doesn't matter if you're 1 minute old or 100 years old, you can transmit this infection. But to what extent, what is the efficiency that a younger person can transmit this to others? Now, there's no question they can transmit it, but there's some interesting data demonstrating there is some data that says, perhaps it's less, the younger kids are just less likely to transmit. They're just not as efficient at transmitting. There's other data that shows the complete opposite, really high viral loads in kids, lots of shedding in kids, viral shedding in kids that were, kids completely able to transmit based on viral studies, completely like as likely as adults to transmit this infection. So, that we can split hairs and figure out, discuss what the role is of transmission. But I think the key point is when you stick, 500 kids into a box and shake it up, kids are going to infect each other for sure if public health principles aren't adhered to, and kids will bring this home and infect others if public health principles aren't adhered to. So, some of these questions are interesting, they're important. Some of them are also just largely academic because we know anyone can get it and can transmit it.
Absolutely. Do you guys know anything about this? Can you discuss new research around the connection between sickle cell trait and COVID risk? You guys,
Sumon can. He did his PhD in sickle cell trait.
I didn't know. Something
straight up.
No.
Full disclosure, I don't know the answer to this. However, I'll say one thing that I remember at the very beginning of COVID, kind of when we were amassing data, which we still are. I found that a lot of these little associations were coming out: blood type, background comorbidities, all these types of different things. What's kind of come through all that noise, a signal that has come through all that noise, is a major risk factors of things like age. And if I can make a bit of I don't want to say almost a theory here, but it seems to be age and almost atherosclerotic risk factors. All right. So that's one of the things that I've noticed people tend to do worse. Now, I'm not saying that's for everybody. I'm just saying that with things like sickle cell, maybe there is actually an association, but these things are all stuff that have been noticed, but haven't been necessarily replicated. But that said, I mean, sickle cell clearly has implications in terms of vascular disease, and certainly COVID can cause vascular types of complications. So it stands to reason that could be a connection. But to my knowledge right now, no tight connection. Isaac, there was a study that came out today that you're going to quote, aren't you?
No, I'm not. I was just joking. I don't know.
But I gotta tell you,
we'll find something.
I gotta tell you though, boy, you're on fire with the papers, man. I used one of your the Decadron one in the ICU, the JAMA one. They come out today.
Yeah.
Tell me,
I didn't publish that.
I know, but I know you didn't publish it, but you tweeted it like a beast.
Oh,
like,
okay.
It was like,
okay. Phew.
I was like, man, you're on top of your.
I wish I did. When you're like, why did I think of that?
Why
one
didn't I think of that?
Start a clinical trial.
Yeah.
I publish crap. I'm like, what do we have? What do we have coming out? We have a good review paper.
Hey, take it. I mean,
we got what's cool? Can I brag for a second? Speaking of publishing, totally unrelated.
Yeah.
Okay, here's a brag. Pardon me for bragging. I hope no one's listening. There's 49 people on here, but we're like 4 of them. So the very, very, very first paper on COVID-19, the very first academic paper on COVID-19 was us.
Really?
January 14th, it came out online in the Journal of Travel Medicine. And it's like, we looked at air travel patterns outside of Wuhan. We didn't even know it was a coronavirus then. It was called, I think it's called like pneumonia of unknown etiology and the potential for international dissemination. We showed where it was likely going to go based on air patterns. Pretty cool.
Can I make a statement about that? The thing that was so amazing about that, if I may add, is that people are talking about China, and these guys mentioned Italy and Iran, and we're talking weeks before anything happened.
Yeah, that was cool.
All of a sudden,
that worked out. It doesn't always work out. You know how sometimes when you publish something, you have a good idea, you're like, it might work out, might not. That one worked out. That was pretty cool. Pretty happy about that. All right, kids. We're talking about kids.
All right. Okay.
We're not bragging about our terrible research careers.
We're going to do some quick hitters here because there's a lot, actually. My God.
Okay. Can we just do rapid fire?
Yeah, let's try and do rapid. So one of you just, this has come up again, so I just want to really clarify. 2 meters versus 1 meter for the kids. Is there anything to support that it's drastically different?
No.
Okay.
You know what's interesting? Farther is better. Okay.
Yeah.
So, there's not like some randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trial of 2 meters versus 1 meter. How about this? Farther is better. Also, there's some psychology in this as well. 2 meters has been ingrained in our DNA since February. Okay. That's all we've heard. 2 meters, 2 meters, 2 meters, 2 meters. It's 2 meters, whether we like it or not. It's 2 meters because that's ingrained in our DNA. And I know some places are doing 1 meter, some places are doing 1.5 meters. Other places are saying 6 feet, whatever that means. It's farther is better, and 2 meters is pretty reasonable.
Okay. I'll be sending my kids to 2 different facilities: one daycare, one elementary school. They are usually glued to each other when at home. Should I be concerned or try to keep them apart?
Yeah, I think in this situation, we have to be pragmatic. I think just let them be. Again, I'm going to be, by the way, by the end of this podcast, I'm going to be a broken record about this. I want to stop and smell the roses for a second in Canada that we have low community spread on September 3rd, 2020. Okay. So I think that in these type of situations, low community spread protects all of us in all scenarios. And I think in this situation that, the chance of anybody getting COVID to begin with is quite low, even in the school setting. I would say in this situation, stick to your public health principles when you're at the facility as much as you can, physical distance where you can. Wash the hands. And when you come home, just, I think being a pragmatic family, just continue as you were.
Okay. My daughter started school yesterday, 27 kids in her class. She has to wear a mask the vast majority of the time, except recess and lunch. Even in the classroom, is this kind of situation sustainable?
Yes, it is. I mean, I don't think the 27 kids in the classroom is a good idea. Even if you have a football field of a classroom, like it can be hard to control 27 kids. I can't imagine that physical distancing would be easy in a situation like that. So I think that's challenging. But I think kids are pretty resilient. Everyone the problem is everyone looks at their own kids and then extrapolates to every other child, which isn't fair. But by and large, I think kids will do it. And again, we're not looking for perfection. We're looking for pretty darn good most of the time. Some of the kids might take off the mask. They might need a little break. Then they'll put it back on. The teacher might not notice. On the big dealometer, this is a knot. It's going to happen. It's just going to happen. So the 27 kids in a class is tough. That stinks. But mask wearing in a class, kids are pretty resilient. They're very adaptable, and by and large, they'll be fine. Of course, it's not going to be perfect. It'll be pretty good, and that's
all we need. Right?
That's reasonable.
Okay. I love this question, actually. Surface transmission. Has anything changed in terms of your opinions?
Yes.
Okay, let's hear it. Because I think I know where it's going. That's why I love it.
I talked about this one thing. I'll keep this short. Is the theater of infection control. Have you ever noticed every single story about every single outbreak has the statement that we found the outbreak, we closed the facility, and then we did a deep clean? I don't even know what that means. What's a deep clean? You should be cleaning things that you normally clean, and outside of the healthcare setting, and arguably even in the healthcare setting, fomite transmission, meaning touching a surface and then infecting yourself, is not a major driver at all. All right. we were all keeping our Amazon boxes outside, washing our groceries, all this kind of stuff. But it looks like the vast majority of cases happen through, respiratory transmission. So I think it's good that, look, after you've touched a bunch of stuff, you're coming home from somewhere, wash your hands. I don't think the kids should be made to wash their hands tons of times at school. This was actually happening in Denmark, and there was an explosion in the amount of contact dermatitis and eczema. And as a sufferer of eczema myself, you can see right here, you don't want to be taking lots of hand sanitizer. So I think the point is before doing any such thing, for example, you would wash your hands anyway, like say before eating, wash your hand. But otherwise, I think that fomite transmission is something that we should be aware of, but it shouldn't be a driver in what we do.
Beautiful. I got a random one. George, did you guys read much about what went on in Georgia? Like they had that crazy amount of cases when they opened up the schools. Did you?
Yeah.
Was there any fallout? Like, was there increased hospitalizations or increased anything after that outbreak? As far as you know. So yeah, just to be clear to the and maybe if you know more than I do in terms of numbers, you could throw that down too.
Sure, I don't know the numbers offhand, but Georgia is a great example. But there's also now it's like uncountable number of campuses that are having big outbreaks, and we're talking about college kids. They're young adults, obviously, but it's really upsetting to watch. And even though there might be good infection prevention and control measures, perhaps in classes, which might not actually be adhered to, it's what's being done outside of the class. So there's like dormitories, parties, fraternities, and we've heard a number of cases associated with that. It's tough, but I think we have to remember that these are by and large, young, healthy people who are just not going to get that sick. Some of them might, but proportionally, very few of them will need to be seen by a physician or be seen in hospital or require ICU care or sadly die. It's just going to be a very, very rare event. Of course, it can happen. It's just going to be a rare event. The problem is nothing happens in isolation. And if you just look in the crystal ball ahead a few weeks, you can see that it bleeds out of this 20-year-old age group and into other age groups in the community. And then there's a lag time as well, usually about a 3-week lag time between a spike in community transmissions and then hospitalizations and death, unfortunately. So sometimes it needs a little bit of time before you start to see that. There can be a little lag time between hospitalizations and death. And I think we're going to see that in many of these places that are having these campus outbreaks. There's a really interesting, it's called a heat map, and it was done in Florida, where it was looking at age groups being affected by COVID-19. And you can sort of see age groups over time. And it's sort of like 20-year-olds, 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 20-year-olds. And then over time, you can just sort of see it drift into older age cohorts. Because, of course, people go home to their parents, they go to their grandparents, they go to the store, they go infect other people in other settings. So it just takes a bit of time, but it'll happen. It's a very contagious infection. So other people are going to get it.
Okay. I love this question too, Julia. Thanks for screening this one. I'm really concerned not only about COVID, but that every upper respiratory tract infection may shut down schools and thus parents' works. The kid has a runny nose, obviously shouldn't be able to go to school, but do asymptomatics have to stay off work long term? So I guess basically, how do we hit that one?
You want? You got that?
You guys, hit it.
This is exactly what I was thinking about. And I think that what makes this very difficult is that COVID-19, especially in children, is very non-specific. It presents exactly like a flu, exactly like rhinovirus, exactly like other, common cold viruses, which are also coronaviruses. So I do see that as being a problem, is that, anytime a kid gets a stuffy nose, you're gonna have to take them out of school, perhaps take their cohort out of school, but then you have to go get tested. And that's the problem, right? I think that right now, as it stands today on September the 3rd, is that, it's not that easy to test people. I mean, you go to the center, but that's still, a day of work. You have to kind of get over there. You have to wait in line. Now, one thing that I think that could change the situation drastically is if we do have the in-home testing. And, Isaac and I were talking about this earlier this week, is that, right now Canada is looking into doing some of this stuff to kind of see if we can get some type of indicator of what to do. We have to really interpret this stuff very closely and make sure we're not using it in the wrong situation, but at least it can give us an idea and some guidance. And there is a saliva test that, if at some point this comes available, might be able to give us an idea of, number one, if you have COVID, number two, if you are actually contagious. And it's something that can be done rapidly and often. We're not there yet, and I do think that the first several weeks are going to be a bit bumpy. People are going to get sick, and I think the way things stand right now, if you get sick with something, the chance of you having COVID versus the chance of you having something other than COVID is much higher as of today. But that said, you can't prove it. You have to get tested. And I think that once we start to get into the rhythm of things, this might be a bit easier. But I'll say one other big thing before I shut up here. But we can't dismiss how important cohorts are. Okay, so in certain situations, your cohort is your entire class. But sometimes, like they did in Germany, you can actually divide the class into groups. So you have a class of, say, 15 kids, but you have 5 kids in each cohort. So they're far enough away from each other that if somebody in one of the cohorts gets sick, you can just take that cohort out and not have to, take everybody out of the class. That makes a big difference because you can actually keep kids apart. You can keep the maximum number of kids in the school, and you don't have to shut the whole school down when there's an infection. I think this is a really, really cool idea because it reduces the number of transmissions between individuals. And we're seeing it done right now with these bubbles that we see. That's what I have to say about that.
Wow. Yeah, that's awesome, Sumon. Thank you. But man, how do we not have a rapid test yet? Seriously.
Yeah.
What's happening?
It's embarrassing.
It doesn't make sense.
Development. Yeah, but they exist. It takes, you got to do the studies, and then of course it's got to get passed through the regulatory agencies. I think it's really important now that we have saliva-based tests. Well, we don't, but the United States does, which is helpful. It still needs a lab to process, but it's extremely helpful. And then these rapid tests are certainly in development. I think they need a little bit more time, but not a ton. And I think what's probably going to be the rate limiting step is the regulatory bodies and how they evaluate them. I think the key thing here is, it's going to be, in a perfect world, they'd function like a pregnancy test, right? It's not perfect. It's pretty good. All it has to do is help guide your decision making, right? You're not asking, the questions they'll answer is, should I send my kid to school today? Yes or no, right? Should I go into the office today? Yes or no. If the test is positive, the answer is no, don't go in. Maybe you should go call your local COVID-19 center, stay at home, or confirm that with a test. Just like a pregnancy test, right? Your pregnancy test doesn't necessarily mean you're pregnant. It answers the question, should I go out and have 6 Crantinis this evening? If your pregnancy test is positive, the answer is probably no. You should probably not. And then maybe go see your family physician the next day to confirm their pregnancy result and get some counseling, right? That's the whole point of the test. It's rapid. It guides your decision-making in real time. It's not the perfect test. It's a screening test. It's not a diagnostic test. It guides your behavior over the next few hours or days and prompts you to seek additional care.
You lost me once you started busting out Crantinis. Do people still drink a Crantini? For real? It seems like maybe very Ally McBeal kind of thing.
Shut off by now, but maybe that was a little too personal information that maybe happened several years ago that may be related to something that might be related to someone's personal life. But yeah.
Oh my God. We'll leave it there. This has come up a couple times, and it might not be fair for a bunch of ID docs, but in your opinions, what will the long-term mental health impacts for children learning in unnatural learning environments? Are you worried about this, at least in amongst your kids, maybe?
Isaac is an expert on child development and education. He was dying to answer this question, so I will be the good friend and allow him to do it.
My God, Jesus, friends like Sumon, eh? Personally, like, I mean, like, as you point out, we're not experts in child mental health development. There's probably a lot better people that can answer that. Having said that, each to their own, right? I think every parent sort of has a good understanding of what their kids' needs are and maybe some of the vulnerabilities and intricacies of their individual children. I'm sure there's some kids that are going to be significantly impacted by this. And I think there's other children that won't be. And I know we're always sort of guided by the people that we're exposed to in our close circle. But if I sort of look up and down our street and look at we have a ton of kids that live in our neighborhood, you can kind of see who is, the resiliency in some of these children. And, you can sort of see some kids that, really do need a more structured environment, who really would benefit from being at school and who might be negatively impacted by all of these, mask wearing, cohort, all these interventions. Whereas on the other hand, you certainly see a lot of kids that are just sort of like, yeah, put on their mask, go to school, no big deal, come home, wrestle with their brother and sister and go to bed, So I think there's, like anything else, there's probably a pretty big spectrum, but I'm so not qualified to answer that question.
Yeah, I'll, you know what, I'll get my wife, the psychologist, I'll get her, after the next question, I'll get her to answer that one.
Is she nearby?
Man, you would think, but she has nothing.
Honey, get your ass in.
All right, I'll get her while we answer this question. Based on Ontario's safe return to school plan, do you think things will come to a point where Ford shuts down all schools again?
Yeah, I think that, this is something that's clearly on all of our minds. And I think that the best way to put it is, I personally think that this kind of national lockdown, this widespread, big sledgehammer type of lockdown that happened back in March is very unlikely to happen in Canada again. Dr. Bogoch and I, as well as our buddy Zain Chagla, we talked about an important thing with COVID-19 is that we are at a point of low community spread right now. We expect to see cases. We can kind of keep this, dance with the virus and keep the levels low. So I think that the chance of this exploding into a situation where we have to shut down everything is low. In March, we had tens of thousands, maybe hundreds and maybe thousands of people returned from travel. They injected cases all at once into the community, and then we had to deal with that. So, hey,
we have an expert.
We do.
Yeah. What's up?
I was like literally making a sandwich in the other room.
Oh, what kind?
Yeah, turkey.
Oh.
Turkey with mustard.
We need
Amazing.
your expertise. We have no idea what we're talking about, and I'm glad there's a professional here.
Yeah, well, I'm looking at the question. What will the long-term mental health impacts for children learning in unnatural learning environments? So I mean, I'm not a child psychologist, so it's hard for me to speak to like the specifics of it. But my experiences and my understanding is that like kids are highly adaptable, right? So it's more important that they're in the environment and they have some consistency and routine, and that they have the socialization. And I think kids adapt pretty well. Like the question about unable to interact naturally with their peers, I have a feeling there will be a lot of natural interactions, and it will just simply be the mask and a bit of distance that is the thing that is different that they'll adapt to pretty quickly. I'm not too concerned about it, frankly.
Bam, mommy dropping science and knowledge.
Awesome.
You're welcome.
Yeah,
thank you.
Can you drop the mic?
Go eat your sandwich. Yeah, I'll drop the mic, but it's expensive. Because this is makes a quality sound. Thank you. Love you.
Amazing.
So good.
This has got to be like one of the highlights of the Quadcast.
I agree.
I
totally agree.
Wife comes in, saves the day, scientist, clinician wife with the drop of knowledge. Great.
she did. So she co-hosted a show a couple of weeks back, and people were like, "We don't need you. Like, just get Kathy to do the show." You know what I'm saying? I was like, "Okay, feelings aren't hurt at all." But sorry, Sumon. To be honest, did you get to finish that question?
No, one quick point. I guess to conclude, I would say in terms of closing schools, I certainly think that as chance would have it, we're going to have certain areas of the country, whether it's certain regions that may have to lock down or may have to tighten their public health restrictions. It's going to happen. I bet you it's going to happen most likely here in Peel. I'm in Mississauga right now. But that doesn't mean it's going to happen forever. And it also doesn't mean it's going to happen broadly. So that's what I predict is going to happen. And I hope, and of course, I'll bet you guys right now that we don't go into a national lockdown again.
Yeah, you guys came on the show last time and predicted. Actually, why don't we just say it again? Like, what for Isaac? Then, what do you predict in terms of what will happen in the fall?
Okay, well, I mean, we know that there's going to be a rise in cases. I think it's pretty clear that people are going to be driven indoors for a variety of reasons. Kids going back to school, people going back to work in person, colder temperatures, economies reopen. There's a lot of reasons why people are going to be clustering together in indoor settings. And even if we try our best, it's not going to be good enough, right? Even if we try and implement these public health initiatives, we know it's not going to be perfect. We're going to see a rise in cases. We're already starting to see a pretty impressive rise in the 7-day averages, for example, in places like BC, Alberta, even in Manitoba, Quebec as well, Ontario. Like we're seeing a rise in cases in Canada. It's not tremendous, but it's there. It's real. There's a trend, and a lot of this depends on us and how we all collectively behave and act over the next few months. But I think the fall, we're certainly going to see a rise in cases. Like Sumon says, it's not going to just spike overnight. It's going to happen with time, but it's happening and it's already started. So the question is, to what extent is that going to impact the schools? I honestly don't know. I just don't know. I think it's not going to come to anyone's surprise that kids are going to go to school with COVID or teachers going to go to school with COVID. It's actually already happened in Quebec. So I think that's going to happen. I think one of the real kickers here, the real question I'm looking for is, to what extent is COVID going to be transmitted in the schools? Like of course it's going to be brought into the schools. There's basal rates of COVID in the community. We know that's going to happen. But how well will the schools' initiatives prevent transmission in the school setting? That's I think the big question. And I think, as we know, not all schools are created equally. Not all provincial plans are created equally. We're going to see some transmission in the schools, and I wouldn't be surprised if there are some schools that have to shut down or close at some point in the winter. I won't be surprised if it's done more broadly, like on a regional level. Hopefully, it doesn't happen at a provincial or a national level, but people speak very confidently about their predictions, and I just don't know how you can do that. Like truly anything can happen. On the one hand, yeah, no one would be surprised if there's a big outbreak and schools have to be shut down over a large area. On the other hand, it also might not happen too. Like it's very hard to predict. And I quite frankly wouldn't be surprised with either outcome. What we do know is that it will be introduced to the schools. It absolutely will be. It has already. But it certainly will be introduced to the schools. The real unknown is how much transmission will actually happen at the level of the school.
Yeah, as a little life hack, the more certain one of these experts come on whether it's social media or conventional media with their assertions, the more likely I am to ignore that and realize like it's amazing. There's so many aspects of this pandemic that's been like absolutely fascinating, and how certain people are about the numbers, what the future lies, sifting through data, sifting through journal articles, even and articles that are now retracted, and so like this has been so challenging in terms of getting a sense of what to trust. And I mean, this is why you guys are here, like, to be honest with you, is that there's been so much misinformation You don't know what to trust. You don't know what
so
like,
bad.
you don't even know where to go.
It's so bad. The other thing too is sometimes, like, I don't know about you, but like sometimes there's people who should know better, right?
Yeah.
People who are otherwise good docs, good public health providers, good scientists, and you look at some of the things. Everyone's entitled to a bad day, right? Everyone's entitled to, you know, a slip up on the air, or, you know, a stupid tweet or something like that. But like sometimes you just see people who should know better, who are sort of making more than one or two slip ups repeatedly over time, or whose, you know, opinions might be, you know, digging in heels, where in the face of new data just don't seem to pivot. Like, oh man, this is not,
that's a really good point
right.
that you make, actually, Isaac, is that, like, I think that exactly, like, you know, for my prediction about the outbreaks or whatever, of course, and if I'm wrong, and I've been wrong many times. Actually, I was wrong at the very, very beginning when Isaac and I were discussing this, and I say, COVID won't really be that much. And he's like, no. I think that, you know, the cats, he kept posting this friggin' meme of this cat coming out of the bag. Isaac, what's this cat coming out of the bag? He goes, you know, I think that there's more infection than we think. I'm like, no. And then, like, literally a month later, we're in lockdown. Right. No, I think it's important that, you can't be confident. You have to kind of consider other scenarios. I think it's quite okay to make an opinion on something, but, you know, when there's new data, you have to, like, you know, gear down. And you know what? I've been wrong many times, and I've continued to learn. It's been a you know, growing experience.
Yeah. And even, I mean, I don't want to sway from our key themes here, but even from the ICU perspective, how much has changed. Hey, intubate these guys early. And then now it's like wait as long as possible. Like the one
Just kidding.
Just kidding.
Intubate them late.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Remember steroids? Dude, remember early in the pandemic?
Oh man, that's true. That is true.
Do not give steroids
early. Now it's
just kidding.
The dream.
Give everyone with ARDS steroids, right? Like,
oh my God.
Great. Pivot. Listen.
Yeah.
Pivot in the face of new data, but also pivot in the face of new data.
Yeah.
The key word is new and emerging data, not pivot in the face of knee-jerk reactions to what people might think might be going on. Like, have some data to back this up. Yeah. There's been a lot of sort of knee-jerky reactions too, which are kind of unfortunate.
Absolutely. So I think I'm cognizant of the time. I think we got one or two more questions, and then we could, you guys could, if you feel like there's anything that you want to add, I'll give you that opportunity. But would HEPA filter units be helpful in classrooms with poor air circulation?
You know, I don't know if anybody knows the answer to that, but I think that ventilation is certainly a thing. I think, you know, there's been a lot of controversy versus airborne and all that. I think the point is, I think that we all agree that good ventilation is key, because a lot of the outbreaks we're seeing are in these small spaces, poor ventilation, and close contact for a prolonged period of time. You know, there's been some evidence, kind of, it's more of these kind of physics types of studies where, like, UV light helps, HEPA filters help. Certainly they help in things like tuberculosis. So presumably they help with COVID as well. But that said, it wouldn't hurt. I think that the better thing, though, is just either do it outside or keep the windows open.
Yeah. There was a question earlier that I don't know if it's appropriate for. I'll just bust it out. Vitamin D. Any second thoughts?
It's your turn, Isaac. It's your turn.
Sure. So a couple of things. Here's where I get the hate mail. So listen, if you're vitamin D deficient, so truly vitamin D deficient, you should probably supplement with vitamin D as per, you know, Canadian guidelines and basically guidelines everywhere across the world. So that's pretty straightforward. If you're vitamin D deficient, does that make you a greater risk for getting COVID-19? Probably not. Does that put you at greater risk for having a severe COVID-19 infection? Question mark. Some people are adamant that it does. Some people say, well, maybe not. But, regardless, if you're vitamin D deficient, you should supplement with vitamin D. Now, do you need to, if you have normal vitamin D levels, will taking vitamin D supplements provide any protection against getting COVID-19? No, they will not. Will taking additional supplements of vitamin D, if you have normal vitamin D levels, enable you to have a less severe COVID infection? No. So at the end of the day, if you're vitamin D deficient, there's a lot of reasons to take vitamin D supplements. And the interaction with COVID-19 and vitamin D deficiency is not entirely clear. Now, people are going to point to data X and data Y, which are these highly convenient observational studies that don't really tell us much. But at the end of the day, if you're vitamin D deficient, you should probably take some vitamin D. For a lot of
I was going to
reasons.
say that exact same thing. So, I'm glad that I give him a chance to talk about vitamin D.
All right, boys. I think that those are the gist and the most of the questions that I could see that were once again curated by the amazing Julia Hajar. And so any parting remarks to our crew out there that are getting ready for the school year or that have started the school year? Anything? We'll start with Sumon. Anything you want to add? And it's okay to say nothing if that's what you want, fresh. But if you want to give some
once
love.
again, I want to say the same thing. I want to give all my support and backing to our teachers, our students, and our parents. We understand as healthcare workers, I guess we're students, parents as well, but we understand exactly how everybody feels. I can actually say that. I understand exactly how everyone feels. We were there once and we all have your back. I think that the one thing that people should remember is that, number one, low community transmission. So I do think that overall on September the 3rd, 2020, things are it's a low risk of transmission. But I think the overall is, remember, there is actually a precedent where things have worked. It's, everything hasn't been a disaster. There's places in Europe, multiple places where schools have been open. Things have worked okay, and things are working okay right now. Things could change. Obviously, Canada is different in many ways, but I do think that ultimately this will be successful. And I think there is certainly hope for the school year to be a pleasant surprise. Could I be wrong? Completely. I could be, but I just want people to know that there is hope, and we got your back. You got this, teachers and students and parents.
Well said, Sumon. Isaac, any love out there for anybody?
Sure. I think this is the fall and winter of tolerance. Everyone needs to just have a little bit of extra wiggle room and tolerance, and that means if a kid needs to stay home, great, stay home. If a parent needs to stay home because a child is home, I really hope employers have tolerance and leniency to allow people to work from home, the flexibility to work from home. If a child needs to be home for a period of 14 days, this is going to be a tough winter. We all know it. It's not going to be easy whatsoever. We're not going to have a vaccine in Canada probably until early 2021. That's still a while away, and things are probably going to get a little bit worse before they get better, unfortunately. So I think obviously we just need to appreciate that these systems that are designed are not perfect, and everyone's just by and large getting by, doing the best they can. It's time to be a bit forgiving, to have tolerance, to have leniency, and obviously we'll all do our best.
Absolutely. And I just want to give some love to our public health. And I've been skeptical at times of some of these decisions, but if you look at a bird's eye view in Canada, and especially including Ontario, where we're all in, we have gone through with never being overwhelmed, with not having super high community spread. The measures that's been in place have been excellent. And what they've implemented, what I'm trying to say is what they've implemented has worked. And so like for them to say that, hey, you know, our kids could be in school right now, that says a lot. And I'm putting my faith in that. And I'm optimistic that the school year will go okay. I won't say absolutely smooth, but it'll be relatively okay. Boys, Julia, thank you so much for doing this. I know whether it's 1 or 2 or 20 parents out there that are now maybe put at ease, the teachers that might be put at ease by this, I think means a lot. So you guys taking the time to do this means the world to me. Thank you so much for doing this. Round 3, you know what I'm saying?
Round
nice.
3.
What?
Yeah.
Round 3 in the books. Yo, for those that are listening, follow us on Quadcast at YouTube, Instagram, Facebook. Leave any comments at quadcast99@gmail.com. We love all the feedback. We love the support. The show's almost a year old, and I can't tell you the amount of wonderful things that have come through producing this bad boy. So thanks again, and we'll connect real soon.
Have a good night. Thanks for having us on.
Absolutely,
Thanks, Kwadwo.
boys. Let's do it again.
Absolutely.